Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Howard. I'm one of the technical marketing engineers for the Cisco Identity Services Engine, or as we affectionately like to call it, ISE. I'm going to show you all the progress we made in terms of putting ISE into the public cloud and being able to automate it with things like Ansible. So for those of you that don't know about ISE, I will do a quick overview of it, talk about our journey into the cloud, why we're doing it, what we're seeing from customers, actually do a demonstration showing you being deployed into AWS, talk about some of those APIs that we use for automation, and then actually go ahead and deploy it in one of my demo labs with Ansible, and then use that same playbook to go ahead and deploy it in our AWS instance that we provisioned earlier. So if you don't know about ISE, basically at its heart, it is a authentication, authorization, and accounting server, a AAA server. We use the Radius and TACACS Plus standard protocols in order to communicate with our network devices. And we also offer a lot of other services like web portals and the ability to automatically profile endpoints, do posture to determine compliance on them if we can do that. And of course, one of the major tenets of Zero Trust is the ability to segment your users and endpoints so they only have the necessary level of access. So that segmentation is an important part of it. So we do this by receiving those requests from our network devices, whether it's wired, wireless, or VPN anywhere in the world. And we can then authenticate the users and devices and increasingly IoT things coming in. And we can do this on the back end with any number of identity providers, whether it's your traditional on-site Active Directory or even now Azure and other SAML IDP providers. So the other thing ISE does is once we can authenticate a user or a device, we have the ability to share that context or the who, what, when, where, and how they're coming into the network. We can take that and we can share it out with other security services so they can kick off a vulnerability scan. They can check the net flows to make sure it's not just an IP address, but then what's Thomas on a MacBook, and they can correlate those over multiple connections throughout the day. And if I download a bad payload or any of these other services detect bad behavior, because ICE is only concerned with that initial connection. If they detect any bad behavior on the network, they can then call back into ICE to automatically quarantine or reduce the level of access to minimize that attack surface for any devices on the network. So what's interesting here is that ICE sits uniquely between your traditional enterprise network and the security services. There's some unspoken ISO networking layers you probably didn't learn in school, which is layer 8 and layer 9, which is financial and political. And this can cause some challenges for our networking teams and our security operations teams if they're quite siloed, they don't always get along. But I think the ability to bring all of this together in a cloud infrastructure, continuously integrated infrastructure, is actually very, very helpful to get these groups to work better together and share their policies and the things that they're doing. So we're enabling this with all these APIs and things because we believe it adds a lot of great value for our customers. So first of all, the flexibility, clearly being able to provide customers the ability to deploy ICE in the way that they need it, whether it's an appliance, a virtual machine, and now the public cloud. The ability to deploy it very quickly, instead of having to do with rack and stack, right? We can now deploy ICE into a public cloud in just a few minutes, which I'm going to show you. Automating things so that it's repeatable and reducing human errors, that's something our customers want. And we're even seeing that they have internal IT policies where if they're going to virtualize a resource like an ICE policy server, it must be automated. It must have APIs so that they can provision the thing from beginning to end, so they can pave and repave their data centers or wherever they happen to live, right? The other thing is collaboration, like I said, being able to have your security policies and your network devices in different configurations in a version controlled repository, so the NetOps teams and the SecOps teams can do their own thing to work together in ICE because they each have their own part of the application that they typically need to manage. And finally, a great side effect of having all these APIs is just customizability, whether it's for customers that need to make sure that they have a specific guest process when guests come to visit, or for our partners who need to build a customized integration for ISE. So all these things are the kinds of things that we're seeing with ISE and that automation is allowing us to do. So what you heard announced at the Future Cloud event was that we're putting ISE into the cloud. We actually already did that in our ISE 3.0 major release that we had, but now we're going to be doing it in ISE 3.1. We're putting it in AWS, and then we're going to follow that on later with the ability to do Azure natively and Google Cloud and Oracle's cloud as well. So ISE is available, or will be available in early August in AWS, and you're able to get this as a CloudFormation template so that you can quickly deploy it into AWS. And that CloudFormation template looks something like this. It's either JSON or a YAML format, and it has some values that you need to specify. And ultimately what we're trying to do here is we need to specify some parameters that Amazon is then going to use with its own APIs to provision the infrastructure in this template. So we're only going to deploy a single ISE node, but in AWS, you can actually use these templates to create stacks of different applications and services so that you can have them all work together. So we could do multiple ISE nodes behind load balancers in our hybrid cloud with our existing network infrastructure and be able to do all the different ISE services that we need. I'll also mention the link in the upper right-hand corner is a shortcut to my GitHub repository where these CloudFormation templates and my Ansible playbooks and tasks are all available for you to play with for the Tech Field Day community. So in addition to deploying to the public cloud, like I said, we also have appliances and we have multiple hypervisor environments that we support. So we're going to be doing zero trust provisioning, not only with Amazon, but we also have the capability in ISE 3.1 to do it for our existing customers with appliances and hypervisors. So now I'd like to go ahead and do a little demo for you of deploying this in AWS. I like to call this my Tech Field Day Amazon Web Services Zero Trust Provisioning for Identity Services Engine. And since you all like three-letter acronyms, right, from Cisco, this is my TFD AWS ZTP for ISE, right? So with that, let's get started. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a stack, and we're going to use that template, that CloudFormation template, and we are going to choose a file, that CloudFormation template, which you can download from the marketplace, or I've already customized it, and we are going to use that right there. What we do in AWS is we customize it with a few parameters. So some of these things for the stack, we can customize these, and other ones will be filled in from the template. So you can see I've already provided a host name right there, but we also want to provide something like a key pair because ISE does have the ability to do SSH. So we want to do specify those things. We have our security groups that we specify for what it can do in its VPC and how we can access it externally. And then all of our other networking parameters we can configure. We're only doing single nodes, so we don't need to do anything terribly advanced here. We'll just click through next. And now it's going to summarize. If you want to check out the cost, we can do that, or it's going to summarize all of our parameters that we're going to provision here. So we can review it real quick, make sure everything looks good, and then we can go ahead and go to the next part and create the stack. So what happens is it's going to take a few seconds here to start the creation process. And so we'll just refresh. You can see it's making a little progress, and here in another few seconds, we'll refresh again and see if our instance has been created. One more time. There we go. Okay, so now it's created our stack, and we can go take a look at the resources that have been provisioned in AWS. So we'll look at this instance, and we can check that it's running. That's good. So let's go ahead and open it up. And we now have our public IP address of our ISE instance. We can go ahead and open that up, but again, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for ICE to come up. So we're going to wait a little bit, and didn't connect. That's okay. We'll give it some time. We'll come back. We'll check on it. All right. So what we're trying to do here with ICE is once we've provisioned it, we now need to be able to use our APIs to provision this instance. And so we've added some new resources in ICE 3.1 to help you with this process. So we traditionally do a backup and restore in ICE. We have that we can do now via API to a repository, and we can then check on the backup process using a task service. And of course, certificates are something that are increasingly something we need to do with more frequency. So the ability to automate that is a huge bonus for customers. And finally, something that we've wanted since ICE 1.0 is the ability to do policies via API, and that's now finally a reality in ICE 3.1 as well. So there's a few additional ones that are going to be coming in our first patch for ICE 3.1, because there's some additional APIs that we didn't quite get in this initial release. But what we're trying to do here is be able to allow customers to do their full lifecycle orchestration and manage all their policies. First, we saw the zero-touch deployment. We did it with a template in AWS. Then you may need to patch it because, like I said, we're going to have a patch coming out, so we're going to have the ability to patch that. And then we're only deploying a single ICE node, but if we wanted to do multiple nodes because we needed to really scale ICE out, we can do up to 2 million active endpoints on the network. That requires multiple ICE instances, and so if you need to collect all those together into a single ICE deployment, you need to be able to specify what roles they're going to have and who's the primary and the secondary and things like that. So that's the deployment automation piece. Obviously, licensing, we got to make sure everything's licensed and working well. Then certificate management, we talked about that. Be able to configure the different settings and things, and of course do policy management. So these are the things that are outstanding that are going to be coming in ICE 3.1 patch 1. So then we'll be able to have the full lifecycle orchestration in ICE. So in terms of the different APIs, open APIs is something that's been around for about a decade now, and very recently they announced their 3.1 open API specification, and so we went ahead and adopted that for ICE 3.1. But we've actually been doing APIs for quite a while. Starting with our first 1.0 release, we had our M&T, or management and troubleshooting APIs. We then followed on with some initial configuration capabilities for ERS, or external RESTful services. And then finally, we added something called PX Grid, which is what we use to communicate with those security services back in ICE 1.3. So we've been doing this a long time, adding incremental APIs to these resources to these APIs throughout the years. And so finally, we started to do the open API specification, since that's now seems to be the de facto industry standard for describing APIs. And what that allows us to do ultimately is have a standardized way that we can communicate and configure ICE for doing lots of different tasks, whether it's automation or just playing around. So we actually have the Swagger utility built into an ICE node. So if you just want to play right there in the ICE web interface, you can play with the open APIs using the Swagger API there. Of course, Postman, you can import collections or these open APIs into Postman and play with it there. Or we can use these same APIs using the new Cisco ISE SDK, which is a Python package, using those APIs, which is used by our Cisco.ise Ansible collection. So all these things are coming out with ICE 3.1. And soon we're also going to be announcing support for Golang and Terraform to do these same things, depending upon what your infrastructure is. So speaking of Postman, if you did want to go ahead and play with some of these APIs, I have a series of collections for these different APIs that I've posted for you all in my GitHub repository, so you can go play with those. And if you want to, do some scripting in Python, we have our Cisco ISE SDK available for you in the PyPI repository. You can go check it out there and just simply install pip install Cisco ISE SDK, and it'll be installed onto your local computer. And in Ansible Galaxy, we have the Cisco.ise collection, which has also been posted. It's not officially public yet. We're still, going through the community process to get it approved and everything. But that's ultimately what we're trying to go for, to make sure that it's readily available and accepted and used by everybody. And of course, these the Cisco ISE SDK and the Ansible collection, they're both in a public source repository in GitHub as well for you. All right, so for those of you that may not be familiar with Ansible, a quick overview of how that's going to work. So we have a series of nodes that we want to manage. ISE is a bit unique in that we only have a single node that we typically talk to for configuration. It's called the primary administration node. So unlike Linux or Windows or I think you're not trying to configure hundreds or thousands of different computers. It's really just one computer, and then it will replicate that configuration out to the rest of the nodes in the ISE cube. So we can use Ansible to do this configuration on our control node, and we'll list our host file where our ISE node is, so we know what to talk to. And we can download those collections from Ansible Galaxy. And just like all the other Cisco packages we have for iOS and Meraki, we also now have the Cisco.ise collection available. And inside of there, what you'll find is a bunch of modules which correspond to the various REST APIs on ISE. So each one of these can be used to create, read, and update or delete resources on ISE. And we do all of this using playbooks to create a series of tasks that will run and basically accomplish whatever it is that we need to do in terms of configuration of ISE. All right, so what I'd like to do is let's go ahead and revisit our node that we provisioned earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to provision ISE in my Cisco demo cloud or D cloud environment first. So what we have is, and that typically runs on a hypervisor. So we're going to get into ISE. We are going to check it out. We see this is a completely vanilla ISE installation, right? There's nothing, no endpoints connected so far. We don't know about anything. So what we're going to do is we're now going to get into VS Code, and I've got my repository that I've downloaded. I've installed Ansible, and this is what a copy of the repository looks like on my local computer. The CloudFormation template's there for you. And here is the deployment playbook, which is a series of tasks. First of all, we're going to enable the APIs. Those are off by default, so as a security thing, but we have the ability to enable them by API now as well. We have the repositories we're going to specify to do a backup. We're going to join Active Directory. We have multiple active directories that we can define depending upon the environment we're in. We're going to define some network device groups and network devices so that we can authenticate to the network. We'll have some different users that we're going to add, as well as some endpoints that may be coming in that are our assets, and kick off a backup because this is our first provisioning of ISE. So what we're going to do here is this is the host file for my ISE demo in dcloud. So I'm going to go ahead and run a playbook in that environment, and we're going to deploy those tasks. So we're going to go through, it's enabling the APIs, it's doing a fact check to find out what version of ISE we have, if we need to use that in any of the further tasks, and then it's going to go ahead and do everything we just talked about. Now, this is something that I'm loving because I do a lot of demos with a lot of customers and a lot of verticals, and the ability to automatically provision my environment for their vertical or the specific scenario they want to do, I'm really loving that. So I can't wait to do more of these different playbooks for things. What we're going to do now that that's run, let's go back. You can see it's already done a refresh on our dashboard and detected 3 endpoints, but if we refresh it again, we should see all 9 that we've provisioned. So it knows about 9 endpoints, but none of them have actually connected to the network yet. And what we're going to do is, you can see the different types that we've provisioned out there. We're going to go ahead and just give you a quick tour. If you're not familiar with ISE, like I said, we define networking devices that are going to connect in. So we have these different devices that are going to come in via radius and TACACS, and we have the ability to create policies based on the location, the type of device that it is, what kinds of authentications we're going to allow, and have different policies in different areas or regions. So these are the different types of groups that really quickly I created these just so you could see some examples of those groups that we could filter on when doing the authentications. And then these are some of my users that I quickly provisioned as well. So having something like a radius probe as an internal account is really nice because if you want to have your network devices testing to make sure ISE is up, that's a great account to have. We also provisioned an Active Directory controller, and we were able to specify the groups that we want to use in our policies to authenticate guests versus users versus our domain computers and other things. We can do obviously a lot more with our Active Directory groups. And we also have a connector for Azure AD as well, if people are interested in that. So this is our example of our policies doing authentications. We can do 802.1x based authentications. We can do MAC authentication bypass. And these are all the different identity stores that we could potentially use to authenticate all the people coming in, all the different methods on our network. And then here's an example, the default policies that come in ISE for the different device types, the different user types. And then basically at the bottom, we fall down to anybody that does a basic authentication, or if we don't have any authentication, we will just deny them as a secure default. So that's kind of the quick overview of how ISE works. This is our live log area where you're going to see authentications happen in real time. So what we're going to do now is flip over, and I'm going to show you my iPad here, and we're going to do a quick authentication. So I have an access point here in my home connecting back into a wireless controller in this lab. And so I'm able to go to the TFD SSID locally and perform an authentication. And my username, Thomas, is in Active Directory. So we're going to be authenticating against Active Directory in this scenario. So we have to trust this cert because I didn't take the time to provision a trusted one from a public CA. All right, so now I should have wireless access. We'll open up a browser and verify that. There we go. So our endpoint has connectivity now through ISE that we just provisioned. And you can see the authentications happening here. We have both an authentication and a session defined. And in the logs, ISE will show you basically, how is this device authenticated? It was done using 802.1x. The authorization policy that it matched against was the default policy set with the basic authenticated access, and we permitted access for this particular user. If we want to get more details about this device or this user, we can drill down in and we can see all the gory details for this user, the device they were coming in on. There's a series of steps on the right-hand side. So if you really want to get in and troubleshoot, you have the ability to do that to see where something might have failed. But in terms of that context, right, you can see we have where they were coming in from, what tags were used that we could have potentially filtered on to define the policy that we put them into. And you can see all of my Active Directory information that also could have been used in policy to affect the authorization decision for this user or endpoint coming into the network. All right, so now that we have that, let's go back to our ISE in AWS. So this one didn't provision a cert to it because we didn't know what the IP address was going to be yet or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and log into it.
I don't understand. I mean, so you have a product that was available on, on premises, and now you can install it in the cloud. But why not a SaaS service? I mean, wouldn't it be better or easier for customers instead of installing a software in a VM in the cloud?
So we still have a lot of customers, tens of thousands of customers that have ISE existing on their on-premise networks, and they want the flexibility to now potentially move some of those resources into a cloud environment. This is giving them that flexibility.
Okay, but it's just a deployment option, which is a pretty basic deployment option. So we are talking about cloud here, and every time we talk about cloud, it's more about SaaS applications. So I would love to see a Cisco ISE SaaS option.
I agree with you. So does our product management team. That's something that we were looking at doing. It could potentially become available in the future, but I certainly can't talk about any kind of roadmap thing like that today.
Okay.
But this is absolutely provide the foundation to be able to do those kinds of things. In fact, Cisco MSX Management Services has the ability to deploy ISE for you in a managed environment, specifically around the guest access scenarios. So we do have some of those capabilities for you today in that limited set of scenarios. Now that we have more of these APIs available, potentially more of these capabilities will be available via Cisco MSX as well. Okay. All right, so then what we're going to do is, now that we've shown you the provisioning, we can run that same set of playbooks, that same playbook. We have to get our IP address from our AWS deployment real quick, because we didn't know what that was going to be. We're going to plug it in to our host file and save that. And now let's go ahead and run that same playbook, but we're going to make a small change, and we're simply going to change it to our AWS inventory file instead of the dcloud inventory file. And now we're going to be able to run that same set of tasks and plays we can run against this AWS instance. And so if we had a customer that wanted to play with some new features in ISE, they wanted to bring up a lab instance and play with it, this gives them the ability to take those configurations that they have in their production network and put it up in an AWS instance and play with it that way. Or if they wanted to just move their entire production over, they could do that in AWS as well now. And certainly, Enrico, this does provide the option for them to also do more of a software as a service into the future as well. So what we do a little bit differently that I wanted just to make sure everybody has a chance to understand is, in terms of the architecture, I mentioned that we have a policy administration node where we do the REST APIs to configure things. We also have a monitoring and troubleshooting node where all of the logs go. So if you wanted to pull reports, or you wanted to do queries for sessions, those APIs would go to that node. We have a policy service node. That's the one that actually handles all the different radius requests and TACACS requests. And then we have a PX grid controller that would communicate with the different security services. Those can all be deployed on a single standalone node, just like you saw us do today. And they could also be distributed completely across all these different independent nodes. So depending upon how you want to scale it, you have that flexibility. So we did it basically today like a lab or an evaluation. You could put a pair together for a small production. You could do a medium production deployment, or you can go really large scale, 2 million endpoints as well. So we could deploy all these out into AWS today. Or you could use your traditional data centers. Customers typically have a couple of data centers that they want to deploy into behind a load balancer if it's a really large scale. But the ability to do this in the cloud now gives them the options. If they maybe don't have a data center in a particular region of the world, or they don't feel like they can put ISE and Active Directory and other things in a particular office in a region, now they have the ability to do it in AWS or any other cloud, public cloud provider. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through with you today. I've got a list of resources here, starting with the repository with my playbooks and things, the CloudFormation template, as well as other things related to what we're doing with APIs in Cisco DevNet, our ISE API references, and of course, our community and things like that if you have questions.